internal price, that is the tariff. And then you have all of these different areas. So it could be that I'm asking you to do it just graphically and see what's happening to the home and foreign, who's better off, who's worse off, right? What is the effect? Or it could be, so now I have areas A, B, C, D, and E. And then each of these areas, well, you may want to name them. For example, terms of trade effect, or production distortion, or consumption distortion. What's happening to the rest of the world? You can look at the area B, A and B, and see who's better off, who's worse off. Price would go down. So consumers in the rest of the world, they would gain area A. Producers, they're going to lose area A plus B. So net effect for the rest of the world would be negative, for example. If you have the equations for these, the demand curve and supply curve, you actually can find those areas. Area A, B, C, D. So check out, if it's a small country, things are more straightforward. You don't need these two graphs anymore. You just focus on that specific country if it's a small country. Okay. So that's trade policy. But we looked at all of these trade policies, and the conclusion was that most of the time they would have a negative effect on aggregate economic welfare. And so why? So we talked a little bit about politics of trade, right? The median voter theorem and so on and so forth. So you're gonna sort of the electoral model and the electoral model. So you want to talk about that as well. I mean, so now, and then I talked also about policies of the developed countries, trade policy of the developed countries, and trade policies of the developing countries. And when it comes to that, now you're going to see short questions that you need to write about these things. So developing countries, what were the different policies that they adopted over the years, right? Which was, at the beginning, they were just exporting what they have comparative advantage to, and then maybe they would try to use trade policy to enhance their terms of trade. That's the second policy. Third one, ISI, in import substituting industrialization, and the fourth one, export bias growth. So there are four policies that they used over the years. So I want to talk about that a little bit. What are the reasons maybe that import substituting industrialization wasn't that successful, and then what happened after that with some countries that tried things differently a little bit, right? So that's for the developing countries. And then you also want to know something about why was it that import substituting industrialization was so popular at some point, right? So it had to do with the sort of politics of that time period. It had to do with the fact that the terms of trade for developing countries decreased for 100 years between, 1800s and 1900s. It was just coming down. So, and it was also the politics and the fact that sort of the way that the leaders of the developing countries, they were seeing things and seeing the trade game in the world, so on and so forth. So I've talked about these things. You want to know something about the stuff that I've discussed. We also talked about developed countries and policies that was adopted with developed countries. It has to do with two things. A strategic trade policy, so when you have imperfect competition in the world, so you have just two firms in the world. So look at the models that we discussed, right? You have just Boeing and Airbus. So that's one thing. The other thing is when you have externality, when you have positive externality for high-tech industry. So it's basically about high-tech industry and positive externality, and the issues that are associated with them. So we talked about the developed countries. We also talked about now controversies with trade. So again, these are the things that you may want to just read, make sure. So we talked about labor standards. And so what are the arguments by labor unions? What are the two issues with labor unions? Whether it's good. Right, so they make an argument about the working standard for the many workers in the developing countries is too low. Is it a valid argument? What can be done? We also talked about environment. So when you think about environment, a couple of issues are important. One, with trade, what is the effect on environment? Whether it's positive or negative, right? So it has, with trade, you have a change in composition of production and consumption. Could be positive, could be negative, generally for developing countries, negative. Economic activity increases, negative. And then income increases, that could be positive. At some point it becomes positive. People buy more of normal goods. So that is the one thing. The other thing, you want to talk about different types of environmental damage. I'm telling you, different types of environmental damage. Whether it is domestic, transnational or regional or global. And what are the issues in terms of trade associated with that? Whether they're domestic, if you want to internalize pollution, whether you're putting that firm, domestic firm, in a disadvantage compared to other firms. Transnational, regional environmental damage. What if, how does a trade policy help? What if you remove that trade policy from your options, which could be WTO could remove that trade policy. Global environmental damage. Right. So Kuznets-Kev. So these were the issues. Again, you may want to hear it. Then the last thing that we discussed last time, I'm telling you guys, relationship between saving, investment, current account. What does it mean when current account is negative? So what's happening with the negative current account? Also, I talked about direct quotation, indirect quotation of exchange rates, and what it means, and real exchange rate. So real exchange rate. In fact, price of a domestic basket of goods relative to the price of the same foreign basket of goods. So real exchange rate. So real exchange rate. Price of a domestic basket of goods, which is exchange rate, direct quotation, times domestic price level divided by foreign price level. So you're converting, this is in dollar, times the exchange rate, you're going to convert it to that other currency. In terms of other currency. So now this is price of an American basket of goods, price of a foreign basket of goods. Now, what's going to happen if exchange rate real exchange rate increases in terms of export and import? What's going to happen if real exchange rate increases in terms of import and export? Your exports, they're getting more expensive, so it will be more difficult to export, right? If it's going down, American goods, it means they're getting cheaper, so it's more easier to export. Just what I discussed on Tuesday. It's on the slides, so you would read it. Okay, dumping. Some of the issues that I haven't talked about. Dumping was part of the second midterm exam. Actually, one of the questions was on dumping. Look at it again. Not only the model that was in the exam, but also dumping in terms of transaction cost. Another thing, very important, guys. A monopoly, domestic monopoly, but engaged in international trade. So you are autarky, there is one firm monopoly. You would engage with international trade, the monopoly would lose all of its power, because now monopoly is competing with every other country in the world. Now you help the monopolist by a tax. What's the effect? What if you help the monopolist with an import quota? Remember, tax, import quota, monopolies. It's very important how to compare the effect of a tax and import quota on a monopolist. Which one is better for the monopolist? Which one is better for the consumers? Do you remember which one is better for consumer? Tax was better for the consumer. So there was this, the model that I went over in class. Look at that. So there's going to be a question on the monopolist. Well, say so you have a monopolist, and then you're going to impose a tax. What is the effect? How to analyze that, right? And I know I'm keeping you for a very long. Okay, let me just say this. I have a monopolist. This is the price, right? Right? All of a sudden opens up to trade. Now this is world price, PW. The monopolist should sell it at PW. Where does the monopolist sell? When marginal cost equal to marginal revenue. So right here. It makes sense? Price would be equal to PW. Now monopolist would lose all of its power. Cannot affect price. Is it good? Right? Marginal revenue would be equal to price because I can just sell it at PW. Now impose a tax, it's going to go up. Exactly by equal to amount of tax. Right? It goes up, and so you would produce again now PW plus T. Marginal revenue would be PW plus T because the tax would increase price. It's like tariff, right? Tariff. So if you impose a tariff to help monopolists, it's going to increase the price. That's tariff. That's how you look at the tariff would increase, shift the price up. That's all. Price would go exactly up by the amount of tariff. Is that good? Okay. What about if you impose a quota, import quota? Here's how you look at it. So an import quota, you have to, if you want to analyze it, this is the quota equal to exactly the amount of quota can be imported. So demand for the monopolist would shift in exactly equal to the amount of quota. Now, monopolist marginal revenue, this is the new residual demand, right? This is the new demand. This is marginal cost of the monopolist. So monopolist would, again, look at marginal cost, marginal revenue. This would be price set by the monopolist. Monopolist would produce here, this is QM, and the rest is going to be imported, which is equal to the amount of import quota. Does it make sense? Yes? With quota equal to the amount of quota, demand is going to be shifted to the left.